Jury. Any matters that either of you need to take up, Mr. Fawcett?
Not from the state, Your Honor.
Mr. Arbor?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Keeping an eye on the weather. I'm reluctant to even bring this up, but so tonight, starting around a little bit around 6 o'clock, they're forecasting sleet that will last till about midnight. Not expected to get below freezing until about 10 o'clock at night, but then it will not get above freezing until tomorrow about noon. So I don't know what that'll do to our roads, maybe nothing, but what I'll do is make sure the jurors have the slips that we handed out during jury selection, and Nancy Van and I will communicate in the morning, probably same time. We'll have a message posted by 7:30 a.m. if there's any delay that we'll need to have in the morning. I'm hoping that this forecast is not going to require a delay, but
Are there any concerns about when you're sending the jurors home today?
it doesn't look like there's, we're still well above freezing right now. It's going to be 37 degrees at 6 p.m. tonight, so we're still well above freezing. I don't think we're going to have any problem as far as the roads freezing over. But
You might seek a job as a meteorologist when this trial's over, because you gain great experience.
That's exactly right. All right, very good. We will go ahead and bring jurors up then. Ladies and gentlemen, towards the end of the day, we'll talk about the weather. We're reluctant to bring it up, but we do have at least a forecast for freezing or sleet, I guess, tonight, starting sometime 6 o'clock, going on maybe to about midnight. Temperatures dipping down below freezing. So we'll use the weather line that some of you at least are familiar from the jury selection process. And we'll have a message posted no later than 7:30 in the morning. If there's going to be any delay, I'll have that message posted. We have the phone numbers. I know some of you weren't involved in the weather instance we had last week, and so we'll give further instructions before we recess. But just want to let you know we're keeping an eye on it. All right, further evidence for the state?
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would call Officer Roy Smith.
So if you would, place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I swear.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, Your Honor. State your name for the court, please.
Officer Roy Smith.
How are you employed, Officer Smith?
I'm employed with the Raleigh Police Department.
How long have you been employed in the Raleigh Police Department?
July of this year would be my 10th year.
All right. Any other law enforcement experience before that?
No, sir.
All right. Were you on duty on Monday, April 22nd, 2013, around 5:19 p.m. that afternoon?
I was, sir.
And in what capacity were your duties that Monday afternoon?
I was employed within the city of Raleigh. I was on patrol in North Raleigh. At that current time, I was approximately on Spring Forest Road.
Okay. Were you dispatched to Tillwood Place, Rainwater, Tillbriar?
I was dispatched to a stabbing.
Okay. Tell us about being dispatched and when you arrived, what you saw, and what you did, please.
We got a call over communications indicating that a stabbing had occurred at that address. I currently was training at that time. The officer, I was in the passenger seat. The officer I was training at that point, Officer Hervey, was in the driver's seat. We made a left on Spring Forest. We looked quickly at the map, realized we needed to make a right. Then we proceeded towards Tillwood. We got updated comments indicating that prior to our arrival that it was a pretty serious stabbing.
When you arrived, tell us about what direction you came and what you're observing and what you do when you arrive.
Yes, sir. When we turned on to, when we turned around, realized we made just a quick wrong turn. We traveled down Spring Forest Road, went over Falls of the Noose, approached Rainwater. We made a left onto Rainwater from Spring Forest, and at that time we were given a lot of information. We got the lights, the sirens, but calls indicated it was a stabbing. So we proceeded to Rainwater and Tillwood. Given there was so much information at that point, we stopped our car in the middle of that intersection. We were probably the third to fourth unit on the scene at that point. And that's where we stopped, at the intersection of Rainwater and Tillwater. And
What'd you do?
I exited my patrol vehicle. At that point, I was facing north on Rainwater. I made a left towards, I believe, Tillwood Drive, and started going towards the address in which the victim was located. As I was walking towards that address, an individual came outside. At that time, I didn't know who he was, but I believed it was Mr. Hahn afterwards, due to the fact that I noticed his hands were wrapped, almost like if they were mummified.
The time that you see this person, his hands are wrapped up?
It took me, I was at Spring Forest and Falls when the call was dispatched. I arrived on scene approximately 3 minutes later. I stepped out of my car. Within 5 minutes is when I came in contact with that individual from when I was initially dispatched the call. At that point, that individual yelled that he's pointed in the direction. I was facing north. He pointed in a eastward direction and said he's 2 houses down.
Officer Smith, let me put up on the screen State's Exhibit 16, which is just a schematic of the neighborhood. Let's see if you can assist you in telling us where you arrived and what you started to do. Let's see if we can get up there in a moment, please.
Yes, sir. Would you like me to go ahead, sir?
Yes, Officer Smith. So when you arrive, tell us what you do, where you are, and
Can I approach?
please.
Yes, sir.
Is that good, sir?
Well, so you leave it for them.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
So the jurors can see.
Gotcha. Can y'all see? Okay. I stopped my patrol vehicle right here. I exited my patrol vehicle, and I started to make a left. I started walking towards a house that was in this area. That's when I encountered an individual that was pointing, that had his hands completely wrapped like they were mummified, and pointed to me in this direction and stated, "He's down that way. He's down that way."
Okay. What did you do at this point?
At that point, after I encountered that individual, I turned eastward, and I started proceeding towards the house, in which he said was the second house on the left.
Okay. And are other officers with you as you get to that second house?
At this time, I had the officer that was training, Officer Hervey, with me at that intersection. There was Officer Morrow was also there. Would you like me to see here? Okay. Officer Morrow was also there with me. I believe Officer Clausweller was also there with me. So there was 4 or 5 officers with me at that point.
Okay. did you take up a position at the what's regarded as the Hahn residence, which is 1705 Tillwood Place?
Gotcha.
Did you take up some type of position at that residence?
Yes, I immediately. I actually, when I went back to my vehicle. I pulled out my patrol rifle from the rear of my vehicle. At that point, I proceeded towards the house, the second house, and I took cover behind a tree. And additional officers took cover, and we put a perimeter around the house.
And the reason why you're putting a perimeter around this house is what information has been made available? Why are you at this house?
Initially, we got it. Initially, when it came out, we didn't know if the suspect was still on scene or not. We had gotten some conflicting information. Some said that he was. Some over the radio said he could have left, or he might have left. So at that point, we still didn't know. We knew we had a stabbing. We could tell by people's demeanor as we approached the house, the first house, that something was bad, but we didn't know what. So at that point, we put a perimeter around the house to make sure that we secured the house, and at that point we didn't know if anybody else was in need inside the house or anything.
Okay. Take us through, you're at the perimeter, tell us where you are, and then just tell us everything that happens.
At that point, I'm behind a tree at cover. At that point, Sergeant Wood approaches me, kind of wants the lowdown of what we got. I've said, that, hey, the suspect might be in this house, still not knowing all the information. I spoke with him. I said, "Look, I think we need to get in. We need to do a protective sweep of this house, make sure no one else is injured inside the home." After speaking with him a little while, Officer Fetzer, who was at the first house with Mrs. Hahn, approached us. I asked him quickly. I said, "Officer Fetzer," I said, "is there a possibility that anybody else could be in that house?" And he's like, at that time he did not know. I said, "Do we need to do a protective sweep? Do we need to make sure that house is safe?" He said, "Yes, y'all have got to get in there. We got to make sure that nobody else is inside." After confirming with Officer Fetzer, I looked back at Officer Morrow. I said, "You need to start giving commands and ordering whoever else is in that house to exit the house."
Okay. And I'll show you some actual photographs after we get through this. But what are you looking at? Front of the house, back of the house? What is your view from your protective position?
I'm gonna stand up and. This is almost. I guess this is the driveway, is what you're showing here. So my tree would have been right here. Officer Morrow was here. We had another officer on the back side of the house, and Officer Herbie, because at that time I was training, was directly beside me. And that stick right there, that little line right there, is almost perpendicular. That's the tree that I was behind. I could see this door and that door, and that's why there was two. There's a side door, and there's also a front door. And since I could see both doors at that position, that's why I stationed there.
Okay. So tell us about the commands before the protective sweep is done.
Officer Morrow began giving verbal commands. This is what we're done in training. We yell so anybody can hear us. If there's anyone inside, make yourself known. And he also says, "Come back towards the sound of my voice." He made approximately 3 or 4 of those commands. While I was sitting there, my sergeant was there. There was a couple officers who were kind of getting our bearings on what we needed to do next. After the 3rd or 4th command, Mr. Broyhill stepped out of the house.
Okay. Do you see the person you refer to as Mr. Broyhill here in court today?
I do.
Thank you.
So no.
Tell us about when you first see the defendant, Mr. Broyhill, stepping out of the house and everything that occurred as he steps out of the house, please.
I just kind of saw the corner of my eye because I was kind of speaking to my sergeant about what we needed to do next briefly. And out of the corner of my right eye, I saw an individual step out with his hands up. He was covered in blood from head to toe. And at that point, as soon as I realized that the individual was covered in blood from head to toe, I ended up taking over the commands myself, and I started ordering Mr. Hahn to turn around and come back towards the sound of my voice.
Which door did the defendant, Mr. Broyhill?
Mr. Hahn exited the side door.
Okay. You said Mr. Broyhill did.
I apologize.
Okay.
Mr. Broyhill exited out the side door.
Hands up, and you start taking over the commands.
Yes.
And what do you tell the defendant to do at this point?
I tell him, turn around. I said, keep your hands up. turn around from the sound of my voice. I didn't want him facing me just in case. I didn't know if he had any weapons on him at this point. And then explained to Mr. Broyhill, walk back towards the sound of my voice slowly, which he did. He complied with all my verbal commands. He kept walking back towards the sound of my voice until he got to a vehicle that was parked in the front of the driveway there. At that point, when he got to that vehicle, he stopped at the vehicle.
Okay. Continue, please.
At that point, when he stopped at the vehicle, I ordered Mr. Hahn to, I was about ready to order him to keep walking back, and I was going to get him in a prone position on the ground. When he stopped at the vehicle, immediately, well, not immediately, but a second or two after I was about ready, as I was given additional commands, he collapsed completely on the ground. At that point, we approached Mr. Hahn. As I approached Mr. Hahn, he laid on the ground. We noticed that he had self-inflicted wounds, as well as blood all over his clothing, all his clothing.
Is he laying on his back, face up?
Initially, he kind of goes down to the side. I don't remember if he was initially on the ground. I don't believe anybody touched him because of the amount of blood that was on him. But I do remember when I saw him, he was face up looking at me, and I could see his torso and his chest and everything.
How far away were you when you were giving him these commands once he comes out the side door with the hands up?
When he initially came out of the side door, I was approximately 15 to 20 feet at most. And I obviously always got closer as I ordered him back towards me.
Once he is on the ground and you're making these observations, do you get close to him?
I was within 3 feet.
Okay.
He was literally at my feet at that point.
What are you or any other officers saying at this point, and what, if anything, is the defendant doing or saying?
At this point, he had collapsed to the ground. I don't remember him actually saying anything. We went in initially to place handcuffs on him, but at that point, when we started seeing that there were some actual self-inflicted wounds and the amount of blood, we stopped. We immediately, we kept him detained. We kept our eyes on him, but we ordered EMS to come towards us.
What injury or injuries did you see when you got maybe within 3 feet of him and decided not to put handcuffs on him?
When he was at my feet, I saw a self-inflicted knife wound to both his wrists. They were so severe that I can actually remember that I could see skin on both sides of his arm right here, flapping. And that was on both hands, or both arms, very deep. And I also noticed what appeared to be a stab wound to his stomach, and I can see his intestines protruding through.
After you make those observations, what is your next step in this process?
Immediately after I see those wounds, Sergeant Best and Sergeant Wood immediately, they were going into cuff, and they say, okay, we need to get him EMS attention immediately. It immediately hits me. We don't know what's going in the house. At that point, I turn my attention to the house. Myself, Officer Morrow, Officer Warren, and Officer Hervey proceed inside the home to do a protective sweep of the home to make sure no one else is inside.
Tell us about the protective sweep of the home, how you enter, and just generally I'll show you some photos later, but generally the observations you make.
I entered the home through the side door, the same door that he exited. Two officers, Officer Moore and Officer Warren. So when we go into that side door, we're immediately in the kitchen. They go to the left. Myself and Officer Hervey go to the right, go to the dining room. After we go to the dining room, so they're clearing those two rooms. I believe it was the kitchen, the living room. We cleared the dining room. There was like an office, I believe, and then we all four proceeded upstairs. And once we were upstairs, after we cleared that, we came back downstairs and then exited shortly thereafter.
Anything noteworthy you found during that protective search?
When we came back down, we kind of all met in the kitchen, to confer, hey, is everything secure? Did y'all see anything? Anybody need anything? Once we conferred that there was nobody else injured, nothing else was any danger inside the home, I noticed in the kitchen that there was blood all over the walls, a pool of blood, I believe, on the floor. I noticed a knife near or in the pool of blood. I can't remember exactly where it was at this time, but I know it was right there by the pool of blood. I noticed, I believe, a chair turned over in the kitchen. At that point, I was like, all right, we got to set up a crime scene, and we exited the house.
How long did the collective protective sweep last?
At most, from the time we entered the house to the time we exited, at most a minute, once we learned that nobody else was injured inside.
Are you or your fellow officers opening cabinets, knocking over furniture, that sort of thing during this protective sweep?
No, sir.
Okay.
We're only in there to make sure that no one else is injured, or at this time we didn't know if there was a second suspect. We didn't know anything because none of us that actually went into the home ever went to where the victim was injured. So all we knew that there was a stabbing and that the suspect was in that house. So at that point, we just did a protective sweep looking for possible additional suspects or someone that might be injured inside.
Once you came back outside, what door did you come out?
I exited the front door.
Okay. Where, if you know, where is the defendant, Jonathan Broyhill, when you come back out of the house?
I did not see him when I exited the house. I noticed Officer Horseman was already. The first thing I remember was Officer Horseman taping off. I remember just running tape right in front of me as I was stepping out and tying it off. At that point, I went and conferred with my supervisors and informed them that nobody else was in the house, that it was secure, and that we could secure it as a crime scene. At that point, since I was a double unit, because I was training at that time, I was the best candidate because Officer Hervey, there would be somebody to drive the police car behind the person that ride in the ambulance. Sergeant Wood instructed me to ride with Mr. Broyhill inside the ambulance to the hospital.
So the ambulance is there, and by the time you come out of the house?
Yes, the ambulance was already there staging prior to when we ever even went into the house.
Okay. So before you go into the house, you get within a few feet of the defendant, you see his injuries, EMS is called, and then you confer with your sergeants, and that's when it was decided you would go in and do the protective sweep?
It was very free-flowing. Our mindset from the get-go when we gave verbal commands was already go inside that house. Obviously, when we saw him that was injured and he needed medical attention, there was a split second where it's, whoa, we got to get him medical attention, and then it hit me within a split second, okay, we're still in danger here. We don't know if anybody else is in that house. And that's when I said, we got to get in that house. Let's secure it. So that was a matter of seconds. And then we were
EMS attending to him before you went in the house?
They were not attending to him in the house.
When you come back out of the house, where is the defendant?
The defendant, to my knowledge, the next time I saw the defendant, he was already in the EMS truck.
Okay. So when you come out of the house, he's now in the EMS truck?
The next time I see him is inside the EMS truck.
And we'll get to this. Do you, in fact, ride with the defendant, Mr. Broyhill, to the hospital?
I did. I stayed with Mr. Broyhill until I was relieved.
Can I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Officer Smith, let me show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 22 for identification purposes, State's Exhibit 23, 24, and 25. Let me ask you, see if you recognize State's Exhibit 22 through 25.
I do recognize all of them.
Okay, just generally, what are those 4 photographs?
This photograph here.
Just to yourself at this point, just generally, what are these 4 photographs?
Okay, all 4 of these photographs are the Hahn's residence.
Okay. Are these 4 photographs, do they accurately depict the scene as you saw it that night? In different forms with evidence tape and markers that you would not have seen, but the interior pictures without the markers.
Yes, it's the same.
Right. And would these State's Exhibit 22 through 25 help you illustrate your testimony today?
It will.
Okay. You're at this point, the state would enter into evidence State's Exhibit 22, 23, 24, and 25.
Any objection? All right, it's allowed for illustrative purposes.
Thank you, Honor. Let's start with State's Exhibit 22, please. Approach the witness, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
There you go. No problem.
So, Officer Smith, State's Exhibit 22. Can you tell us what we're looking at here, please?
That is the front of Mr. and Mrs. Hahn's residence.
All right. In that photograph, can you sort of point out where you were when you are giving the commands? Well, when your fellow officer was giving the initial commands of anyone to come out of the house, and then you picked up on what you saw Jonathan Broyhill come out with his hands up.
Officer Morrow was almost parallel to the side door here. He gave verbal commands from that position. The tree's not in this shot, but I bet you this tape is tied directly to it. I'm right here at this tree, seeing in from an angle the side door, and I could see the front door clearly.
Okay. Now let's go to State's Exhibit 23. Tell us what we're looking at here on State's Exhibit 23.
That is the side door of the Mrs. and Mrs. Hahn's residence that I made entry into.
If you come in the side door and turn left, is that the refrigerator and the kitchen area right there?
Yes, sir, it is.
And if you come in and turn right, are you going into the dining room?
Yes, when I made my right turn, I was in the dining room.
Let's go to State's Exhibit 24. Now, these evidence placards, numbered placards around the kitchen area here, those obviously were not there when you went in for your protective suite. The numbered placards, 7, 8, those are not there when you go in to do the protective sweep. Is that correct?
No, sir, they were not.
But for those placards, is everything appearing as it was when you went in and did the protective sweep?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Everything's the same.
Tell us generally what you can see in this photo, what we're looking at, and anything of any noteworthy items that you recall seeing.
I do remember the blood and the knife. I didn't come in from this position. I came in from a different position, so obviously it looked different to me than this picture does now. But it obviously was the same, the blood and the knife. I do remember the chair being kind of down from an angle. And for some reason, I do remember the dog bowl as well.
If you could, Officer Smith, would you stand up and kind of point out, I think you said knife, dog bowl, and a chair?
Yeah, I believe when I walked in, I believe from this side.
Okay.
And I do remember seeing kind of through the table the knife lying around the blood. I remember seeing the chair kind of down, seeing the chair down, and then also, I don't remember why, I remember the dog bowl.
Where's the dog bowl in this photo?
Right here.
Okay. Let's go to State's Exhibit 25, please. Now, can you tell us where the defendant, when he comes out of the side door, where his path of turning around, walking backwards towards apparently your commands at this point, and where he comes to onto the ground?
Yes, sir. When he exited, he did exit to the side door. When he exited, I saw him on those steps. I saw him. He came out with his hands up. He was being completely cooperative. That's when I ordered him to turn around. He walked back on this path. He kind of walked crooked, which there was things in his way, obviously the cars. Then when he got here, he stopped and kind of sat down on the front of this vehicle here. At that point, that's when I was about ready to give him verbal commands to get prone onto the ground, and then that's where he collapsed. And it was in this area in which I stopped. I kind of came up from this side. This is where I observed him when he was already falling on the ground.
What's his demeanor like if you made some observations of him when he comes out of the house and as he's complying with your commands, at least to the extent you formed any impressions of his demeanor? I know he turned backwards and complied.
He was completely, at that point, he was completely cooperative. He was calm. There was no issues at all. He did everything how I asked him to do it, and in a timely, did it as I told him to do it.
Let's talk about the ambulance ride. Tell us, once you're signed to ride in the ambulance with the defendant to the hospital.
Yes, I was.
Tell us about what that means. Who's in the ambulance and what happens and your observations, that sort of thing, please.
Based on the information at that time, based on the fact that he was covered in blood, based on the fact that we had heard that the suspect was possibly inside the home, we probable cause to believe that he had been the one responsible for the stabbing. At this point, I knew there was a stabbing and someone was injured from a stabbing. At that point, he was in our custody, and since he was in our custody, and obviously probable cause to believe that he had committed a heinous crime, he had to stay within my custody the entire time, or within officer's custody the entire time. So from that point on till whenever he was taken to the Wake County Jail, an officer has to be assigned to him or with him to keep the chain of custody. So at that point, I was the first officer, and I stayed with him the entire time.
So let's tell us about what ride in the ambulance is like.
In the ride in the ambulance.
Describe the inside of the ambulance. What's going on? What the defendant is saying or doing? And tell us.
I get inside the ambulance. He's very quiet. Mr. Broyhill was very quiet. He was on the gurney, lying down. He was being attended to by emergency medical services.
How many people?
There was a driver, and I believe just one. I believe he was, to my knowledge, at this time, he was being attended to by one person.
In, let's say, the bed of the ambulance?
It's in the back of the ambulance, in the bed, yes, sir.
3 people back there?
At this time, it's Mr. Broyhill, the EMS worker, and myself.
And then there's a driver driving you to the hospital?
Yes, sir.
All right. Tell us about what goes on during this drive to the hospital.
At this point, I'm just watching him. I'm not saying or talking to him or anything. And I just sat there. EMS did ask him some questions concerning medical nature, what happened, what's going on, asked him some questions of that nature. At that point, I just stayed with him. I was, given I knew the seriousness of this crime at this point. I didn't say hardly anything at all. I just watched.
So Mr. Broyhill answered these questions?
By the EMS worker, he does.
Right. Tell us about that. What does he say?
He asked him some questions as far as, what's going on, what happened. Mr. Broyhill's response was, I just want to die. And he was very upset and began to cry. And just spoke about harming himself. Or wanting to die.
Did he say it more than once?
I believe so, yes.
And at this point, he's upset?
Initially, he was very, very calm. It wasn't until the EMS worker started questioning him a little bit that he did get upset and started to cry. He never continued to cry for an extended period of time, but he started to weep a little bit, yes.
Is he answering the questions put to him?
Yes.
Do you recall anything else he's saying?
I can't recall anything else this time.
How, and tell us about the wounds I think you demonstrated. Were these the wounds you saw to his both wrists? Were they horizontal wounds, vertical?
They were vertical to his wrist. I'm sorry.
No, tell us about what type of treatment he was receiving in the back of the ambulance, if any.
They were working on him the entire time. At this point, I noticed they were working on him. The whole entire time they were giving him, the EMS workers giving him all his attention. Considering the gravity of the crime that he had committed, I just made sure this guy's not demeanor. He stayed calm and cooperative the whole entire time I dealt with him. But at that time, I didn't know if he was. So I was very much in a safety. Okay, I'm just going to make sure this demeanor is not ever going to change. So I just watched him to make sure he never turned aggressive. So I witnessed him working on him. I don't know exactly what he was doing when he was working on him.
Stopping the bleeding, bandaging, I don't know. I was asking.
He constantly worked. I was watching him to make sure he wouldn't do anything dangerous. I don't know exactly what he was doing, but yeah, he constantly worked on him.
How long was the ambulance ride to WakeMed from the location of the Hahn's residence on Tillwood Place?
Approximately 8 to 12 minutes or so.
Okay. At the hospital, tell us about once y'all arrive at the hospital, what occurs. Just take us through as much detail as you can remember.
Got you. When we got to the ER, we pulled in the back, the ER bay. Everything was a frantic pace at this point. They rushed him. At the same time, I'm gotten there afterwards, but everything's pretty hectic because they're also working on Mrs. Hahn. At this point, they both go into the same ER bay. There's two metal tables or metal beds, essentially, where they place people lay them down so they can begin working on them. If I was looking at the two beds like I'm looking at you now, he was to my left. They were working on him, at least 10 people. And then to my right, there was a bunch of people working on her. A curtain separating them.
Tell us, at some point, are you instructed to find out some biographical information of Mr. Broyhill?
I was. While I was in there with him, I received a phone call from my sergeant saying they needed some of his personal information as far as his address, name, and if he would give that to me. So I was instructed by my sergeant to obtain that information from Mr. Broyhill.
And did you go about doing that?
I did.
Tell us about how you did that and what answers he provided.
At this point, while I was in the ER bay, he was completely calm. I walked up, asked him those questions, what's your name, what's your address? He was able to give me all those answers without any delay.
It was marked as States Exhibit 111, and we asked you if you recognize the handwriting of the States Exhibit 111.
Yes, sir, that's my handwriting.
Okay. What exactly is States Exhibit 111?
It is a note from my notepad with my handwriting, and it's the information that I wrote down from Mr. Broyhill.
Okay. Gave you his name.
On here, I have his name, his date of birth, as well as his address. I also have a phone number on here. I don't know if that's his phone number or not, as well as another date of birth, which was from a previous call. But the rest is all his information.
The address he provided you, what was that address?
What I have is 2325 Glasscock Street, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Did you, when you got this information from the defendant, you asked these questions, he responded appropriately?
Responded appropriately, and there was a brief, I spoke with him multiple times about his address, because when I called my sergeant, we're like, we don't think that address is correct. So I actually went back to him, and confirmed. He was completely calm, cooperative, and confirmed that that was indeed his address.
What other duties were you assigned at the hospital? Were you asked to collect anything?
I was instructed to obviously stay with him, and when we could collect his clothing, to do so.
Okay. Did you in fact collect some clothing
Um,
from
'Cause-
Mr. Broyhill or from Jamie Hahn?
I did not collect any, to my knowledge, from Mrs. Hahn. I do remember, because I was training at that point, so there's another officer with me. We were responsible, I believe, from getting some of the clothes, but I don't know if he got them or I got them. But we were with him the whole time because we even had to go into a clean room and get dressed up like doctors because it's a clean room.
Did he go into surgery? Did John Broyhill go into surgery?
He did. He, like I said, I had to wear a mask. I had to get a complete doctor's robe on because he, after the ER, after about 15 minutes approximately in the ER bay, he ended up getting to where he was going to have surgery. And that point, we had to before we could even go in there with him, we had to get completely cleaned down, and as they were working on him.
Okay. And did you go into surgery the entire time?
I wasn't in the actual surgery room, but I was in the viewing room directly, like essentially a small wall, no further than me and you are right now.
And how long did the surgery last?
It lasted longer than I was there. I approximately was there for about an hour. At that point, another officer came. Now I recall that we did actually had seized the clothes at some point because we had turned over the clothing to that officer. It was Officer Mike Smith that responded, and we stayed there until he came and relieved us of our post at that point.
Okay. When you were relieved at that post, what did you do, Officer Smith?
At that point, the clothing was left with him. There was no evidence or anything that was that. I reported my sergeant had given him an update about what had occurred, and that was pretty much the extent of my involvement. And then obviously I had to write a supplement in my involvement in the case.
Recall seeing at the hospital at some time, you saw Jamie Hahn?
I did.
And where did you see her exactly when you were dealing with Jonathan Broyhill?
There was a moment while they were working. I was kind of sitting at a V. He was to my left. She was to my right. While they were working on her, there was a moment where I saw her, and no doctors were working on her. She was completely nude on the table, and nobody was working on her. It was briefly. I think they were getting prepped. That's just stuck with me ever since.
Other officers were entrusted with viewing and dealing with Mrs. Hahn's
They were.
surgery and medical attention.
They were.
And at some point at the WakeMed, did you also see Nation Hahn?
I did.
Tell us about the circumstances of seeing Nation Hahn.
I've never spoken with Mr. Hahn. As I was walking into the hospital, I saw Mr. Hahn because I felt for him from that moment. I saw him. He was just sitting outside of the ER bay, and I knew it was Mr. Hahn because his hands at this point are just white gauze all around him, and he was just sitting there alone.
Your Honor, the state would offer State's Exhibit 111 into evidence.
Any objection? It's allowed.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Good afternoon, Officer Smith.
Good afternoon, sir.
Joseph Arbor. I'm an attorney. I have some questions about your testimony. Okay.
Yes,
Turn
sir.
your microphone on, sir. Thank you.
Let me ask you a couple of questions first about your testimony about being a police officer. You testified that you've been an officer with the Raleigh Police Department now for about 10 years. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that all of your experience has been with the Raleigh Police Department. You weren't with any other police agencies, correct?
No, sir, I've not been.
All right. When you became a police officer, you didn't just come off the street and say, here's a badge and a nightstick.
No, sir.
You had to go through a certain amount of training, correct?
Yes, sir.
They sent you, or you applied for and went to some type of police academy where you were trained to do this job. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Was that a prerequisite to your getting any job or to even applying for a job as a police officer?
I applied on January 28, 2005. I was hired by the Raleigh Police Department, and I started the Raleigh Police Academy on that day.
So how it works, now had you had any criminal justice or police enforcement courses prior to that time?
I did.
Did you do that in school?
I did.
Where was that?
East Carolina University.
Okay. Did you go to school with the thought that someday you'd be a police officer?
I did.
So you had some training in school about doing this type of job?
Yes, I took, I majored in criminal justice at East Carolina University.
Did you get a degree in that?
Yes, sir.
And that's a bachelor's degree, a 4-year degree?
Bachelor's of Science, yes, sir.
When you graduated, that degree, even though it's in criminal justice, it's a 4-year degree, it is a bachelor's degree, that's not sufficient before they'll put you out on the street as a police officer, correct?
No, sir.
At least with the Raleigh Police Department, and well, you went to school for some of this, your understanding was when you went to school for this is that if you got a job with any police department, you were probably going to have to attend an academy to learn how to do this, some additional training before you could actually go on the job and start doing this, correct?
Yes, sir.
In fact, even after you do that, and we'll get to that, there's ongoing training. Like, for example, you were talking about you were actually taking an officer around with you that day doing some training yourself, correct?
Yes, sir.
I think that was Officer Hervey.
Yes, sir.
When you went to the academy, they taught you, if you didn't already learn it in your criminal justice classes, that one of the things you have to do in becoming a police officer, or learn how to do, is prepare a police report, correct?
Yes.
Sometimes referred to as a supplement, correct?
Yes.
There's many purposes for a police report, isn't there?
Yes.
For example, you've been an officer for 10 years.
Approximately, yes, sir. January 28th, 2015. I'll be employed with the police department for 10 years.
Have you been patrol most of that time?
I have, with a brief stint as a school resource officer.
If you probably, as you sit here today, couldn't give me a number, unless you can, how many cases and arrests or investigations and traffic stops that you've made in those 10 years, could you?
I could not.
It'd be in the hundreds, possibly thousands, correct?
I haven't arrested 1,000, but
I didn't mean arrest, but you...
I've conducted, yes, of investigations, yes.
Because when you're on the job, you're doing this every day.
Yes, sir.
And sometimes multiple times in a day, correct?
Yes, sir.
You have to do something. And if you were taught when you went to the academy that one of the things you have to do, if you are involved in most incidents that require you to do something, that one of the things you have to do is you have to generate a report about what you did at that particular event. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
One of the reasons you have to do that is because you do so many cases. It's a way of recording what you did in a particular case so that you can recall what it is that you did.
Yes, sir.
With that many volume of cases, if you didn't do something in writing to record it, some of the facts of the different cases might start to get mixed up.
Certain cases, but not all.
No, but I'm saying, for example, what time do you remember what time you went on shift that day?
That was day shift. That'd be 7 a.m.
And this is happening at about 5:20 in the afternoon.
Yes, sir.
So, and have you had Officer Herbie with you the whole time?
Yes, sir.
So I'm guessing that in between 7 a.m. and 5:20 in the afternoon, you've been on patrol in the North Raleigh district of, the city, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as you sit here today, do you recall if you made any stops on that particular day of any other vehicles?
Off the top of my head, no, sir.
Because you're not being asked about that, right?
No, sir.
That's why you do a report. If you had to, you could go back into the system and see what things you did on that particular day if you generated other reports on that particular day, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that would be your way of refreshing your own mind what you did on that day or what you did at a particular event, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's not the only reason you do a report. The other reason you do a report is because you may not always be on the job at any given particular point in time, correct? You might go on vacation.
Yes, sir.
You might be called away for some other thing.
Yes, sir.
You have people on the force with you who are like members of National Guard. Sometimes they get called up, right?
Yes, sir.
And or they go away on a family emergency.
Yeah, I guess so, yes, sir.
And they're not available.
Yes, sir.
And so if somebody wants to find out what you did on a particular case, that report can provide some guidance as to what, say, Officer Roy Smith did on it is Roy, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, did on a particularly given day with respect to a particular incident.
Yes, sir.
Another reason is that there's usually some sergeant or captain or superior officer who's barking in your ear saying, do your reports, right?
Yes, sir, I guess. Yes, sir.
Well, they're telling you to get it in there because this is something they want. This isn't just some directive that's put toward you. This is toward all police officers that work within the department. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Another reason is that you may be called upon to testify at a trial like this type of proceeding, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you may have to look at those reports as a way of refreshing your recollection of what you did at those particular events, correct?
Yes, sir.
Particularly since so many other events happened. This is almost 2 years ago, right?
Yes, sir.
You've been involved in a lot of different things in between the time of April 22nd, 2013 and today. Isn't that
Nothing
true?
like this, sir.
Sorry?
Nothing like that day, no, sir.
This was one of the more significant ones. Would that be fair?
The most, yes, sir.
This was the worst case you'd been involved in?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But you still have had other events happen.
In the past 2 years?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so you knew that at some point you're going to maybe called to testify, and part of doing a report is so that you have that report to look at, refresh your recollection about your events, about
Yes, sir.
what you did,
Yes, sir.
and what you may have observed other officers do.
Yes, sir.
The other reason is you might run into some guy like me who comes in and asks you a bunch of questions, right?
Yes, sir.
And that helps you to be prepared to answer those questions.
Yes, sir.
This area of North Raleigh, let me ask you about that. Are you familiar with that area? Is that an area that you patrol regularly?
It is.
How long have you patrolled? Have you done other districts in the city?
I have. I was initially assigned to the Northwest District, which actually had part of the North as well, but I've been assigned to the Northwest District and the North District of Raleigh. So for my entire career, I've worked the North and Northwest Districts of Raleigh.
So this particular area, you're very familiar with it. Would that be fair?
Yes, sir. I also grew up and was born and raised in Raleigh, so I'm familiar with. It's where I grew up.
Anywhere in that area?
Pretty close, yes. I grew up pretty close to that area.
Okay. So you're familiar not only with the streets and things, but you're with the terrain as well.
Yes, sir.
Rainwater Drive is a connecting street between Spring Forest and some other busier roads farther north of there, correct?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Rainwater Drive? Rainwater Drive starts at Spring Forest, correct?
Yes, sir.
When I say connecting road, if you head north on Rainwater, it'll take you to some other busier thoroughfares that it intersects with.
It's
correct?
mostly through a neighborhood, very, very large neighborhood. But yes, it'll connect you to other parts of the city, yes, sir.
And it's it's not like I'm not suggesting it's like a Capitol Boulevard or something, but it is a roadway that people in that area would have to take to get into their developments that come off of it, correct?
Yes, sir.
The time that, did you make note, by the way, of the time that you got the dispatch to go and answer this call, if you remember?
I remember it was getting close to the end of my shift. 5:30 seems approximately. It seems accurate because it was getting very close. At that point, I knew we only had about an hour left in our shift. So,
and at 5:30, Rainwater Drive, and being familiar with that area, would it be fair to say that street gets a little busier around that time because that's typically a time when people are. Hold on, I'm not done.
oh, I'm sorry. Apologize.
Okay. It's a time when people are coming home from work at about 5:30. Isn't that correct?
Yes, 5:30 is a common travel time. Yes.
So, people getting back to their homes that come off of this street, 5:30. That's a time when there might be a little more traffic than there would be, say, at like 3 in the afternoon.
Those times are heavier traffic times. Yes.
The 5:30-ish time.
Yes, sir.
When you're getting the call, I wasn't real clear. I'll let you clear it up for me. Were you on Spring Forest with Officer Hervey when you got the call?
We were on Falls.
On Falls and News.
And then we make a left on the Spring getting the call. So,
Okay.
And then that's when we realized to turn around make the left on the Spring Forest. At the same time we're getting the call, he had made the left. At that point I look at the map and realize we're going north. We're going west on Spring Forest, and we needed to turn around and head east on Spring Forest.
So when you got the call, you were headed direction on Falls. You correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, sir.
All right, and then made the left onto Spring Forest, correct? Yes. Then
I looked at the map.
rectified where that was taking you in the opposite direction.
Yes, sir.
Did a turnaround. And again, this is about 5:30. Spring Forest is also a little bit busier road. Like I said, maybe not as busy as Falls and News, but a little bit busier road.
Spring Forest is busy, yes.
Yeah. You gotta get turned around, come back, cross Falls and News again, go down to Rainwater and make a left, correct?
Sir.
You don't have to go terribly far down Rainwater from Spring Forest to get to where this location is, right?
No, sir.
All right. And the streets, we've already had some testimony about this, split off. They have different names on opposite sides of the Rainwater, correct? Like on the right-hand side, it's Teal Wood, and on the left-hand side, it's like Teal Briar.
I believe that's accurate, but off the top of my head right now, I'm not 100% sure.
And you recall from being familiar with that area that when you get right past that intersection, the road on Rainwater sort of drops down a little bit. There's a little bit of a hill there, correct?
To my recollection, I do remember a little bit of a hill, yes.
When you get past, heading now north on Rainwater and getting past the corner of, say, where Teal Wood, Teal Briar, and Rainwater is, and just past it as you're going down, there's like I don't know if I'd call it a stream, like a ditch or some kind of water thing in the back of the houses back there. A little body of water back there. If you know.
I really don't know, sir.
So you may not you're not saying there isn't, you're just saying can't recall it.
Yeah, I don't know, like off the top of my head, no, sir.
When you're going, I think you said that what they put out on the call was that it was a pretty serious stabbing. I don't know if you meant that that's what they said or that's how you took it from the way it was put out.
The way the comments kept coming in, the comments and what was provided to us, it made us believe it was more serious than just. Sometimes we have stabbings in which somebody's just been. Kid gets upset and pokes their mom with a fork, and it comes out as a stabbing. Based on the comments, we knew this was not the case.
You knew. You don't know what you got coming and waiting for you, but just based upon the calls, this does not sound like something minor.
Yeah, the information provided in the call suggested it was serious.
And I think you said that by the time you got there, there were other police cruisers who had arrived on the scene,
Yes, sir.
and some of the emergency personnel had arrived on the scene.
To my knowledge, they were, but I'm not 100% positive. I do remember there was police cars kind of right by me when I got to exit in my vehicle. Immediately when I was approached by that individual telling me to go 2 houses down, I don't remember seeing EMS, but it was to my knowledge they were already there.
That's what I was going to ask you. When you saw it was not another officer. It was this individual who you had said that when you observed this individual, both of his hands were wrapped, almost looked like they'd been like a mummified thing.
Yeah.
Heavily wrapped.
Yes, sir.
And this is the individual pointing you in the other direction, saying 2 doors down.
Yes, sir.
Because when you got out of the car, do you have the exhibits up there with you?
I do not.
Did the schematic? May I approach the witness, Sharon?
Yes, sir.
That's okay. They've seen it. I'm just going to hold it here. If this, if this doesn't work for you,
I can see it.
okay, good. Because like I say, if it doesn't, go ahead and feel. I'll ask the judge you can move out of the box.
I'm fine.
My recollection is that you placed the car here in the southeast corner of the intersection. Is that correct?
I pretty much. It was in the middle of that intersection. We were pretty much in the middle of the road.
Any recollection at all about? And I'm not holding you to a number. Maybe how many cars were there at that point?
I remember there was a couple in front of me. I know I wasn't the first two. I was at least the third and fourth. I believe I was the fourth, if I had to give you a number. The fourth or fifth officer there.
My recollection of your testimony, again, you correct me if I say it wrong, because I might have forgotten, but when you get out here, I think you said you headed west onto Tealbriar initially, correct?
Yeah, headed west in that direction towards where I believe the victim was, yes.
Right, and Officer Hervey was with you?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm just curious, at that point, did you have guns drawn yet?
No.
Okay. Plus, you see other police officers, would be reasonable to assume there's the area's been secured somewhat.
Yes. Well,
it's on the screen now. We're going to wrap up in a few moments, but if you want to.
It doesn't matter to me, Judge.
All right, why don't you go ahead and sit down, and then he can.
I'm still going to have to stand if he gets up, but
I think some of the jurors in the far corner are having a little trouble seeing.
oh, I'm sorry, I was blocking their view.
That's fine.
Well, here, can I use that then?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. I got it on the other side, so I'm not.
no problem.
I'm not in any good. When you see the gentleman with the bandaged hands,
Wrapped hands, yes, sir.
and you don't have an identity at that point,
No idea.
did you at least assume, because you saw the bandaged hands, that he'd been tended to by somebody?
I did not have enough information at that time. I didn't know what was going on. At that point, I was just getting information. He's that way. He's 2 doors down.
You don't know what's going on with that.
I really don't. I'm just trying. I just knew that they were good there. Somehow information got relayed to me that the officers were secure there. And then we got information that, hey, he's down there. The guy that is down there, 2 doors down. That's when we proceeded in the other direction.
Okay, and I think you said you were down Tealbriar's a little way.
Not
very
far. I just got down on Tealbriar, and as soon as I started walking down on Tealbriar is when I was confronted.
Now you then, trying to remember. I'll sit down.
And we'll wait for the afternoon. We'll
Okay.
start again tomorrow morning. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for the afternoon, evening recess. We'll resume at 9:30 tomorrow morning. That's the plan, at least at the moment. While you're on recess, recall the instructions. Don't talk among yourselves or with anyone else about them or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation. There is media coverage. Extreme caution around all media outlets. And please have no conversation with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. We'll resume tomorrow morning at 9:30 unless you hear otherwise. We have printed again for you the jury clerk's number on this slip of paper. Again, your specific instructions regarding you. For other jurors, that's not for you. Message for you sometime starting from 7:30 on. This number is also the number that you would call in the event that we go ahead and start court at 9:30, but you're coming out of your driveway and on your road or whatever, and you need to contact us to let us know about. So this would be the number from Ms. Van and the jury. She would be the one that would be able to relay that information to this courtroom. So I'll give these to the bailiff for those of you who copy of this. Thank you very much for your service. Leave your notepads in your chairs, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9:30 unless you hear otherwise.
Am I good, John?
Are there any matters that we need to take up before we recess?
Not from the state, Your Honor.
All right, and you're welcome to call that number as well in the morning to learn what the plan is anytime after 7:30. All right. We'll be in recess until 9:30 tomorrow morning.
Therefore, be in recess till 9:30 tomorrow morning.